Hey everyone, this is Nick from Tenacity.ai with my co-host Jason, and you're listening to the Cloud Cost Optimization Podcast. Today we're going to dive into one of the techniques for proactively managing the environment for aging infrastructure. And, this problem manifests and forces you to react to it eventually, but manifests in sort of abandoned infrastructure, orphaned infrastructure, infrastructure from old projects or legacy infrastructure that maybe is from a migration or transformation that ends up lingering in the environment for a long period of time, sometimes forever, sometimes until somebody comes in and actually does an audit or a very deliberate project to clean it up. We see this over and over and over. In fact, Tenacity has a tool that we've built auto detects a lot of the attribution or characteristics of abandoned or orphaned infrastructure. But we want to talk about how you would, kind of hand roll and proactively manage this yourself, whether you have a tool or not, but an important way to kind of get your arms around identifying infrastructure from an aging perspective or from a use perspective. So, Jason, I guess the first question is, what sort of do you think about first if you're managing, a modest scale or even a high scale environment? How would you signal or identify or proactively manage infrastructure for its age to make sure that you aren't ending up with abandoned resources?
Yeah, I think, one is first to start off with making sure that you can identify and inventory everything that you have, right? I mean, that's like the first step, because if you don't want to spend a ton of time on this if you don't have something that you feel is valid, right? Which, is making sure you know what you have, why you have it, and if you don't need it, get rid of it. Then that's your inventory list. And then, obviously next step, you're going to prioritize that. Obviously the things that, it's like data classification, right? I have my publicly available data. So any of my infrastructure that's sitting on the public, I have my internal data, and then maybe I have my, and classify these based on their sensitivity and their risk, right? Because you might want a different lifecycle policy for a web server that's open to the internet, as opposed to maybe something that has no public access and sits internally, right? So you're going to want to make sure you understand those things. And then from there, it's about taking that and choosing. There's a few different methods in which you can choose. Time based is probably an easy one. Either have an expiration date, like milk expiration date for.
So you're talking specifically about setting metadata, right? So creating custom metadata.
A tag.
Okay.
Yeah, a tag, maybe like a resource tag that says this is created, or this was started on deployed on this particular date. And whatever the life cycle policy for whatever that classification is, right? Time-based A could be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. You could just set an expiration date in the metadata, in the tag data at time of deployment as well, right? That's another one. Go ahead.
So I was just going to say, I just want to summarize this for listeners. So I think what you said is, the first thing to do is actually, if you have an environment scale and you haven't been proactively managing for aging, to do the actual exercise of cleaning up. That's number one. Is know what you have, inventory it, understand it, groom it. Maybe that's a tool. Maybe that's a project. Maybe it's bringing in a third party to help you out. We've seen all of those examples. And then once you understand it and you are now deciding to proactively manage it, you will now want to divide up your resources out there and understand kind of where they fit. Are they front end, high external use, sort of your production environments that are your critical apps? Are they your internal back office support for the organization, or for whatever internal processes you have? Maybe it's your data processing, et cetera. And then you want to, at that point, think about, okay, I need to now start setting some metadata to signal to me what is in production how old it is. You said time based, so maybe pick up there. So that time based piece. There's expiration. Of course, there would also be maybe created. You could
created expiration. Yeah. Who created it is also very important, right? Because one of the asking a question right before you terminate something is always important. So knowing who owns the infrastructure might not be a person, could be a team, right? There's project based. This is like, does this work for your organization? I don't know, but if your organization leans heavily on projects, you can, in the tagging metadata, you can tag it with a project name, which, projects get started, then sometimes they get scrapped, then sometimes they move on to the next phase and actually get deployed. And lots of companies have a ton of infrastructure deployed from projects that were scrapped ages ago. I mean, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, projects, in my experience, 20 years of doing this, projects rarely have a date on which they actually end. It's usually, it's a phase you go through. The end of a project often takes a very long time. And one of those final things you do is cleaning up all that infrastructure, all that tech that you needed in order to do that project. So even when you finish a project, it's rarely like, hey, on Friday, this project's done. It's more likely it's a long transition over time. And that last cleanup piece often doesn't happen.
Right. And it's most often in these projects, it's like we did half of it, but we've got to shift our focus here because of whatever reason. This happens especially now with, our last podcast, we talked about some of the issues in the economy and the hiring. Especially now, projects are getting put on hold like crazy right now. And what happens? 2 weeks go by, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 months. You still got all this infrastructure sitting out there, as you mentioned. Now, if I was looking at my infrastructure in my context, I would see a bunch of projects there, and I would look and go, wait a minute, we decided to dismantle that particular project, I don't know, 6 months ago, and we're still spending X amount of thousands of dollars a month on the infrastructure that's running. So project-based can be effective. And oh, by the way, it doesn't have to be one of these. It could be all three of them, right? Or all
absolutely.
Four, whatever, however many.
Yeah.
Right. You could, tagging is almost infinite on a resource, so there's no reason to not tag it with when it was created, whatever project code it's assigned to, whatever environment. And then I think of versioning is, it's like more of if you can get to the point where you're truly DevOps, to use a buzzword, like this whole buzzword. And if you can actually get to a point where you're treating your infrastructure just like it's a piece of software and application, and you're versioning everything, that can be very powerful as well to track versioning to make sure that everything is up to date from a version perspective.
Yeah, to me, it's interesting, the versioning piece, because sometimes it's date-based sort of tagging or acting can be misleading, because I might say, well, I want an aging report, so I'm gonna put a created date in there, and I'm gonna get a report that tells me everything that's 30 days, 60 days, 180 days old, right? And I'm gonna act on that report. Well, what if I have a piece of infrastructure that does need to stay there for a much longer period of time? For whatever reason, well, versioning can actually help with that, because I can say, well, all right, now I'm in this deployment cycle. Everything in this deployment cycle for this particular, what I'm trying to do or what I'm trying to accomplish inside of the application is maybe version 5, and the front end stuff's 5.3.6, but the back end infrastructure that's doing all my data loading, maybe it's rarely getting updated, but it's still version 5 and it's 2 years old now. And so I that helps me kind of think past the sort of time of this infrastructure is getting really old and into maybe it's just really stable, right? And so I can manage it that way. So that's sort of a way to get around the whole time-based aging, which can be really annoying to an engineer sometimes, to go, yeah, I get that it's 60 days old, but I'm not recycling that because I need that and it's really stable. So I'm going to leave it alone for now. I think that's important.
This does create let me ask this. It does create I'm going to use an example. Lambda function, right? It's just a piece of code. The infrastructure, it doesn't matter when the infrastructure was created for that, right? I mean, at a high level. So how does tracking life cycle for a Lambda function differ than, say, like an EC2 instance or an RDS instance, which is very much something you spin up, it's running, it's, from an infrastructure perspective, right? Because somebody else may be managing the code for that Lambda function. Is there anything different I should do for a Lambda function than maybe an EC2 instance?
Well, I think it's still important to have that metadata. From my perspective, it's still important to have that metadata because, yes, the EC2 instances are going to cost me a lot more money than a Lambda that's somewhat idle, low invocation or no invocation. That's probably not going to cost me anything. The issue I run into is when I'm managing a fairly large code base, I don't want it to just continue to grow and have junk. I mean, if I'm thinking about software, I don't just want a bunch of junk in my code. I actually want to keep my code fairly clean. In Lambda, when you think about infrastructure, when you think about deploying infrastructure as code or infrastructure as software, I don't want 100 Lambda functions out there that have no use. I want to clean them up. I want to get them out of there because all they're going to do is muddy. You and I have this experience. They just muddy the water in troubleshooting and trying to
they
resolve
hide
issues.
other things.
Absolutely. Or they do something unexpected, like, the unexpected somehow we invocated it maybe recursively, or we ended up with an issue that does create a cost driver because we left something out there that was named in a way that maybe we mistakenly are now calling it for some dumb reason. I mean, we've run into all sorts of lessons in the make sure you clean up after yourself in the past 20 years, certainly in my coding experience, that you just don't want to leave that technical debt growing for you to take care of later.
I completely agree with you. And it just, sometimes it seems it's just not the first thing that engineers think of is to clean up, unless it's causing an issue somewhere else, right? And so it's just it's not the first thing they think of, nor should they. I mean, I'm not saying they should. Like if it's not something that needs to be done, I'm not so sure that they should be thinking about it.
As an engineer, I want to amend that just with one thing. I bet they're all aware of them, but the demands for what's on their plate push other things to the front of the list. And if you give them that week to go clean up, I bet that's the first thing they go take care of.
Completely agree that they're aware of them. I agree with that. But like I said, if it's not hurting something else, it most likely won't be taken care of unless it's made a priority. Completely agree with that. And I agree with your summary about it. Every resource, including ones that you don't pay for, like IAM rules and IAM roles and IAM policies, right? Yeah. That's part of your infrastructure review, right? So whether you're paying for them or not, they should be reviewed for one way or the other, for various reasons, right? With Lambda functions, you just mentioned it. You don't want a bunch of stuff out there that's not working. With other resources like EC2 instances or RDS instances, it could be spend, right? And with IAM roles, IAM users, it could be security related reasons. And Absolutely. So having a life cycle policy that states these things need to get reviewed X amount of days, these things you might just not review Lambda functions, but once a year, right? Yep. Whereas you're going to probably review IAM users every 90 days. It's just going to be a different cycle, but it all serves the same purpose in that what we're trying to do is make sure that what we have is what we should have. It's what we should be paying for, nothing more, right? Because extra infrastructure leads to surprise AWS bills, broken budgets, and security-related incidents. They just do.
Yes.
Hey, I just talked with a prospect that had old legacy infrastructure. In fact, the first thing that somebody said when they saw this piece of infrastructure was, "Hell, we haven't used that in months." It was infected. It had been compromised, that one device. We're lucky that it was just that one device and it wasn't doing anything. But it was the first thing that somebody said was, "Oh, we haven't used that in months. So I don't even know why it's still up." And it had been compromised. We caught it, or they caught it, and everything ended up being fine. But this is a perfect reason. Had somebody been reviewing the infrastructure, right, on a regular basis, they would have caught that thing. It would have been deleted. No harm, no foul. But
I think, to bring this into summary, the final question I was going to ask is, is there any infrastructure? You should you should life cycle all of your infrastructure. Is there any infrastructure you shouldn't life cycle, or it's unnecessary to life cycle? And I think the answer, without thinking really deeply about this, is no. You should life cycle it all, and you should be thinking about that life cycle with all of it. Even when you have tools like Tenacity in place, it's important to think about these things. I mean, Tenacity can help you with that because we allow you to do all sorts of custom filtering and viewing and creating different ways of looking at the data that you put in there, so it can help you with that aging and so on, or that reporting. But it's important to think about this life cycle across your entire environment, because the number of times we've gone in and seen organizations as they age having aging infrastructure that really does become not just a cost issue or a troubleshooting issue, but does become a security issue over time.
Absolutely. And
awesome.
And a lot, if you go look at it, a lot of the security related breaches have to do with infrastructure wasn't properly managed, maintained, inventoried, and lifecycle.
Absolutely. All right. I think that's it for today's episode. Go out to tenacity.ai, check out the website, hit us up if you'd like a demo, and take time to download the Cloud Cost Optimization Handbook. We'll continue to be updating that with these various with the various techniques that we talk about on how to proactively manage your environment. Thanks for listening.